be here somewhere. Okay. So I'm not going to give a typical research talk. So I'm afraid it's going to be uphill after this talk rather than the usual downhill, because after Ernesto's ending, he's taken some of my material, but there's still plenty more. So I'm not going to talk much about Ginés's scientific contributions, but I'm going to start with the history of our friendship, our collaboration. And before I met Ginés, I'm going to give a little background to how I was prepared to benefit from knowing him. We did do a lot of research together. We wrote 22 scientific papers together over the 41 years since we met. And one of the things to think about is that we never had any problem with authorship. Now, many of you out there will always know that there's often time-consuming and emotion-consuming fights over authorship. And Ginés and I never had a problem with that. It was always good fun, and we usually tried to get the other person to be the first author. It used to be the first author that was important in the early days, and of course it changed for no reason at all to being the last author, and just showed that it didn't really matter too much to us. And we used to discuss this sometimes and make jokes and toss coins, and that was all that happened. So I thought I would start with a bit of background, and I started long before Ginés was born, I think. In 1962, I started doing full-time research, and I worked on the hemipteran insects, which you call chinches, I think. And I was prepared, though, for an interest in Drosophila. I actually applied to Kurt Stern, who was a very famous American Drosophilist, as to be a postdoc with him, but he wasn't interested. So I didn't work on flies until after my second postdoc. I got into genetic mosaics, though, before. I got there by chance, and I needed to mark my cells because I was doing a lot of grafting experiments. I needed to mark them. And there wasn't any color mutations in the insect I was working on, which is this beast, Onchopeltis. And you see the color there, it's in the cells. So it's very nice. The cuticle is completely transparent, and the color's all in the cells. And I wanted to make mutations to make the different colors in this bug, and I did succeed in doing that by X-rays. But what I noticed was that after I'd X-rayed the embryos, there'll be patches of colored cells, different color from the background. And I read this paper by Bryant and Schneiderman from 1969 and about clonal analysis. I also knew something about Antonio Garcia-Bellido's work at that time, and I thought this is pretty exciting. And it was very fortunate that about this time, Antonio Garcia-Bellido, he invited me to Madrid to give a talk under the auspices of the British Council. And so I came along to Madrid. I was very excited. I think it was the first ever invitation I'd ever got after 10 years of research. And so I came along. And that's where I first met Ginés in 1973. So thinking a bit about how Ginés and I work, I thought I'd reflect a bit about the different kinds of scientists. And usually if you have a collaboration, you want to have a collaboration between different kinds of scientists. And there are three kinds of scientists that I can think of at the moment. There are those who think, and those who read and listen to pick up what's going on out there, and those who look. And I'm definitely in the latter category. I'm a looker. I learned this from my Professor Wigglesworth, who was my supervisor, that nature is the best source of original ideas. If you look at material, the material doesn't know what's in the literature. It doesn't know what's publishable in Cell at the present moment. It doesn't have any idea. It's just there, and you look at it, you look at results, you look at slides, you look at cells, and it asks you questions. So that was what I did. I think Ginés is more a thinking scientist. So we were complementary. He had the brains, and I had the eyes. And so another thing that we were different about is I have a rather dangerous tendency of thinking that what everybody else thinks must be wrong. And that's useful, but of course it can lead you in the wrong direction sometimes. Not very often, actually, funnily enough. Whereas Inés, being a thinker and listener, is more influenced by what other people were saying. So we had a position of argument there between us. Now, about our approach, neither of us worked very hard. I wouldn't say that we were lazy. It's more that we tried to think about saving time. Jim Watson advised, and one of my favorite quotes has been a guide for me all my scientific life, every scientist should be somewhat underemployed. And I think this is very good advice, and I've tried to follow it. Most of us have too much to do, and so we think we've had a good day if we've counted 1,000 flies or collected 100,000 virgins over a month or something. We think we're doing well, or run 25 mini preps. But there's no real virtue in that. And it's important to remember it, and you can save a whole year in 5 minutes in a bath with one good idea. I think we both agreed about that. And then there was strategy. I remember that at the time, fashion was saying, if you want to study a mutation in Drosophila, the best ones to study were the ones that had the most pluripotent effects, that affected everything. And Inés and I don't remember which of us worked out that this was silly, that you're bound to get in a mess if your gene was effective in everything, and most likely it was doing everything it was needed, like for mitochondria or something boring. We wanted to understand development. We wanted to understand animal design. And so therefore, we chose mutations that had local effects. We thought they were much more interesting. And that was an important strategic decision, which influenced our work a lot. And that's what attracted us to wingless. We wrote the second ever paper on wingless. The first one was written by 2 Indian scientists who discovered it, published in Developmental Biology. And we thought this was pretty interesting for the reasons I've just given. We thought it had an intriguing phenotype. Now, we wrote the second paper. If you look at PubMed now for the Wnt genes, just mentioning Wnt in the title, there are 20,000 publications of that. So the next thing that was a sort of style of our work was genetic mosaics. And in that, we have to thank Antonio García Bellido, whose insights into the power of genetic dissection with using cells were so important. Antonio was the first person, I think, in Drosophila who realized how important it was to think about a cellular explanation of things and to go and find mutations that marked cells one by one in the cuticle. He went to Caltech to look through the collection to do this. And this was tremendous insight and allowed us to do the experiments. So in this, we really were just following Antonio's lead. So I first met Inés in 1973, as I've said, and I was asked to give this talk, and we had, in connection with this talk, we had what Antonio called the briefings. Now, the briefings consisted of going to a room in Velázquez, the old lab, and sitting in a room that was so thick with smoke, I couldn't see the screen hardly. And the talks went on for nearly a whole week. And Inés's talk lasted for more than one whole day. So there was a lot of discussion. I won't say it was very efficient discussion, but inefficient discussion can actually be quite productive because things turn up. And this discipline we have now, this almost Germanic discipline of giving talks for 25 minutes, or 10 minutes or 12 minutes, talking very fast and packing slides with huge amounts of data were perhaps not good for being creative. And the one thing that you Latins are good at, I always think, is that your Spanish tend to be rather original in your work. You may not be so good at rigor, but it's a funny thing that originality is rather rarer than rigor. And rigor can be more easily learned. Originality is something you're kind of almost born with. So that may explain why I've been told, and I haven't been to many of the talks because I got here late, but the talks have been very good here with lots of exciting new stuff. I remember sleeping in the Residencia when I was there, and they put me in a very small room full of smoke, and there was a small bed, and it was very narrow, like in a monastery. And above the bed, there was a huge metal cross. that I was so worried it might fall off and kill me in the night that I had to move the bed back to make sure it wouldn't be lethal. So that was the briefings. That went on for nearly a week, I think. And the next year, I came back, thanks to Antonio and his group's hospitality, and I stayed here nearly a month and was taught how to do Drosophila genetics. And it was a very exciting time in the lab then. It was very noisy, and there was lots of smoke, of course. And a very important thing happened to me, which is why I'm still standing here now, is that Jesus de Pena, who was a student at the time, had a motorbike, a big motorbike, and he took me around Madrid on the motorbike. And I didn't have to be very clever to think, you, Lawrence, will not be buying a motorbike or ever cycling on one. So I never went on a motorbike after that, I think. So after the month in Madrid, or was it after the briefings, I can't remember, I came back to the LMB and I gave a report on all the things I'd learned about compartments and so on. And while I mentioned that, I should show you this slide, which is what I'd got with my colored spots in the bugs, which was the position of these spots. So if you irradiate very early, then you get big patches of disseminated groups of cells, and if you irradiate very late, you get small patches. But that doesn't matter. The important is what you'd expect. You make patches. The point was that the patches seem to follow particular boundaries. And this paper was published in spring 1973, and I came to talk to the briefings with these ideas and these results. And so it was very exciting to me. And when I went back to the lab, as I was saying, I reported things like this. This is a twin spot with one daughter cell giving this patch of hundreds of cells, another daughter cell giving this patch, but then respecting this line. I talked to them about what we discovered here and what I discovered from Inés and Antonio and Pedro Ripoll about the compartmentalization of the wing, which they hadn't yet published. And I got Francis Crick and Sidney Brenner and a lot of other people who were at the LMB pretty excited about this at that time. And I still remember sitting there for a couple of hours giving a discussion of what I'd learned in Madrid. So we were very impressed. Now, this is a picture of Antonio around that time near his holiday home in Rascafria. Or you know it's in Rascafria, Vinuelas. And his two boys. Now, how am I doing for time? I got lots more. What? 5 minutes. Is that all? What? I've talked for 25 minutes? 10 minutes. Okay, I just want to know. Okay. So Inés came and was in Oxford then. You saw the picture of him, extremely fofo at that time. And obviously he had to come to Cambridge, to get some strength and to improve physically. And so he asked me, and I asked Sidney whether we could have him as a postdoc. And Sidney, he came and gave a seminar. No one could understand a word he was saying, because he smoked feltas then, and his accent was very strong. And Sidney was mostly impressed with the fact that I could understand him. And then, so he was admitted to the LMB as a postdoc officially of mine, though in fact, really, I was his postdoc. And this is how he looked then, coming to the lab. And you can see that they weren't quite sure whether he began with a G or a C. And then he was also not very well spelt. So this was his starting salary, and Inés will remember this because this is written by Barbara. Now, Inés is the only one who knows what I'm talking about. But Barbara was the secretary who, for example, Barbara, I wrote my book in pencil, and Barbara typed it. So then this was his salary. That was a year. Okay, so Francis Crick was very impressed, with what had been discovered in Madrid. And he and I decided to write an article, and I still remember that we couldn't decide the order of the authors. And I said I thought it'd be best if it was alphabetical, because we'd done it together. So it's nice to have written a paper with Francis, who's a real hero of mine. And there's just one particular paragraph I want to highlight to you at the beginning, because I think this paper was quite important in making people realize that out of Spain come good things, I mean scientifically, because they weren't really aware of that before. People always realize how creative Spain was in recent times in the arts, but not so much in the sciences. And you could read that. Can you read that at the back? More or less? You get the drift of it. Okay, I'm going to... This is the paper on Engrel, which I'm not going to tell you about, because Ernesto already has. This is how compartments affected me, which is actually how I gave my talks. And this came from Ginés's butcher, Julio, who had it in his shop. I can't go into that. Now here you see Ginés in our garden with Mark Brecher and a cigarette, and my wife Birgitta in green there, and Barbara Pierce, and various other sundry people from that time. Now, this is the famous visit of Ed Lewis, and I think, Ginés, you're going to talk about this, because you've got a whole hour, and you're not going to be in such trouble as I am. So I think I won't talk about it. You'll talk about the bet, and you'll talk about how we couldn't get the coding right, and Tom was there, and all right, okay. So after Ginés left, I really missed him, and we started what was a very voluminous correspondence. And it was about that time, and this is just one of my files, and I wish I could read you some of these. Well, I'm going to, I hope, but I might have to stop. So at that time, I had a letter from Seymour Benzer, who asked me about compartments, because he didn't really, I don't think he really credited it that much. Now, I'm going to read this to you, because I guess you can't read this. I sent him a picture and a paper. I sent him the 1976 paper, and I sent him a picture, a slide of the wing. Can you read that? No. Thank you very much indeed for sending us the beautifully mounted mosaic wings. The sharpness of the line separating anterior from posterior is really spectacular, and the consistency of its position is quite impressive. Previously, we had seen only some rough hand sketches shown to us by Antonio. It's not that we didn't believe it, but seeing the primary material is always so much more satisfactory. The slide is being sent on a separate cover. And so, you see, I think that Seymour didn't believe it. He wanted to be, like any good scientist, he wanted to be convinced. I think it might go in a minute. So, I'm now going to tell you a few stories until I'm stopped. Right? You decide. So, for many years, Ginés and we, my wife and I, and Pat Simpson quite often, Pat Simpson, I do regret very much, is not here, and she's not well, we went on these expeditions. And they were called the Great Grados Expeditions. And they were obviously to the Grados Mountains. For those of you who've read Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls will know that the Grados Mountains feature there, and there's something similar for us. So this is the group in one of the early, setting off from, what the hell's that place called? Where we all set off from? Maestro. The place we set off from, that village. ¿No recuerdas? Neville de Pal de Tormes, that's it. So there we were. Ginés, of course, was carrying nearly everything. And that's how it used to be. Pat carried almost nothing. I carried a medium amount. And Birgitta, who's a tremendous force of nature, carried an enormous amount. That's Birgitta in green, and Pat, a little one in the middle there. We did lots of things. We went to many places. We mostly went to Grados, but we also went to Palacios, we went to the Picos de Europa, and we went 18 times on these expeditions over 30 years. Things changed. This is another early picture. We're on top of the Fergonal there, aren't we? That's the top of Fergonal in Gredos. Seems to be rather cold. Now here, here's a picture that we're, of course, very proud of. This shows, well, we thought we were hombres perfectos, but of course we weren't. So Inés and I decided that one of us had the best top half, and the other had the best bottom half. And I can't remember who was supposed to be best in which part, and more importantly, where the line went between the top and the bottom. Now, Inés was very impressed with his physique, so especially after all the slimming that went on as a consequence of him being in Cambridge. So you see here, Inés putting on his gorilla pose for my photograph. And there's Pat and Birgitta there. And I should say that, which one is this one? Yes. I think you have to read that one. Now, you can't read it, so I'll have to read it out to you, but then I'll need that thingamy. I should explain that Inés at that time was doing a lot of reading, and he was very interested in English language, and his letters had become quite flowery, and he's enjoyed learning English. His English is really beautiful, and so he loved using lots of long words and things and pretending to be a very important English Victorian. So, dear Dr. Simpson, this is to Pat. I'm organising an expedition to the Gredos Mountains, which are located in a remote part of Spain. I designate this forthcoming expedition the GGE-5. Two well-known British adventurers, Dr. and Mrs. Lawrence of Great Wilbraham, Cambridgeshire, have already expressed their desire to participate. Two native women, by the names of Isabel and Lala, have also shown interest, but as you know, natives in general are unreliable, so it would be unwise to count on them for sure. I think the strength of the expedition would increase greatly if you were to join us. Also, your experience of travelling in the Far East and countries outside civilization would be very valuable. As for possible itineraries, I do not think we should restrict ourselves to routes of easy to moderate difficulty. The reason is Dr. Lawrence, who has though a pretty good physical condition considering his age, he is well now into his 40s, is nonetheless past his best. Mrs. Lawrence, on the contrary, poses no problem in that respect. As for the dates of the expedition, I suggest June to July. We always used to go at the beginning of July when the weather was sound. At that time, the weather is usually settled. It is unlikely to have problems with avalanches or stonefall. The equipment will be the usual one: tents, rucksacks, sleeping bags, warm clothing, etc. I'm intending not to use artificial oxygen in the entire climbing, but I propose to take some should Dr. Lawrence need it. Food. Generally, I stick to the famous dictum, and this is from Himalayan climbers: the most important thing about food is that there should be some. Just a little food of any kind would be sufficient for my needs. This is, however, not the case for Dr. Lawrence, who, in spite of his general lack of vigor, usually displays a prodigious appetite. Okay, so that's enough of that. So there were, now look, I've got more stories, but do you want me to stop now? What? One more story. So now the question is, what's the story? Well, this is a very short story. When we went to the Picos de Europa, we discovered that Inés had a fixation on the El Naranjo de Bulnes. Now, he wanted to take us to the top. And really, I think the reason is, so the story goes, that it's a biblical fable that once Inés was on the top, and it was so late when he got up there that he had to sleep in a cave. And he was joined by another mountaineer, a woman of outstanding beauty. And they looked at the stars together all night. I don't know whether this is true. I think it probably isn't. Anyway, the time we tried to go up it, Inés was always, as always, in the front, and we were trudging behind him trying to keep up. And it was foggy. You couldn't see more than 5 meters. And we walked up for I think, for about a week. And we never got to the top, because at one point Birgitte said, this is crazy. We can't see anything. We don't know where we are. It's very cold, and it's wet, and it's foggy, and what's the point? So we turned round. Now, I have more stories, but I think I better stop, eh? Yeah? I don't know. Okay. It was a problem that Hines catered one year. He did the catering, that's providing the food. And there simply wasn't enough. And we were hungry, really hungry. And you know what Hines did? We had an allowance of 2 sweets per day, each person, because he hadn't brought enough. And so what he did was he kept the sweets in his pocket. And when we'd already eaten ours, by the evening, when we were desperate, and he was supposed to catch trout, and he was supposed to provide enough food for us, and he came back with maybe 2 little trout like this, then we were really hungrier. And then he would take out the sweet he had in his pocket, and he would eat it really slowly in front of us. All right. Hines did a lot of reading. I haven't got my book. Yes, I have. Hines does a lot of reading of mountaineering books. And I think he likes to see himself as a mountaineer. And as you know, in later years, he did do a lot of climbing in the Himalayas and big places like that. And so, Pat Simpson has said, books, True North, Frozen in Time, The Fate of the Franklin Expedition, The Lost Men, Shackleton's Ross Street Party, the ones who ended up in South Georgia, The Fatal Passage, The Untold Story of Scotsman John Ray, who discovered the fate of Franklin. Now, Hines probably read these already, and what I'm hoping, not very secretly, is if he's read them already, I can take them home. But so he did a lot of reading. He read P.G. Wodehouse quite a bit, and that's, I think, one of the reasons why he wrote that letter I read out to you, the log one, because it has certain phraseologies that reminds me of P.G. Wodehouse. I think that's it. I was going to show you what happens when you become important, but I think you already know that. This is Hines in India. Hines in New Zealand, it's raining. Hines fishing, early stage. Hines fishing, middle stage. Hines fishing New Zealand, you've seen that one, that's my picture. And finally, Hines fishing nowadays, which I think consists of sitting around with a lot of important people discussing, I don't know. Oh, there's one more thing I want to tell you, which is that when we got the Asturias Prize, I don't think even Hines knew this, I had a plan. Because when you go up, when you've got your things that you carry, whatever they're called, certificates, you have to go to the front where everybody is. There's huge lot of people there. You have to go to the front, and everybody does something different. And I decided, whether Hines knows this, to treat him like a boxer who won the match. So I decided to grab his hand. And hold him up like the winning boxer, like the umpire does. Because I wanted to indicate to the Spanish audience that he was the winner in this competition between us. And the trouble was, he didn't know I was going to do that. And that's why, if you look at the picture, you see, I'm trying. I'm glad this didn't happen to me, I have to say. I really am coming to an end now. This is a recent event where the gorgeous Tamara Rojo was there in the middle, and she gave a wonderful talk about science and art to us in London, the Royal Society. And there's Pedro Echenique on the left there, and various important politicians in the middle. And now Hines, as we've just heard, is now a real savio who knows about all kinds of things that we don't, the unknowable. He knows the unknowable. And since about how you can live forever and so on. And it never happened to me. And it's interesting because Hines went on and became a savio who knew everything after the Asturias Prize. And I don't know whether it happened to you, Antonio, when you became a savio. I guess you were treated like one. Whereas to me in England, nobody knew what the Asturias Prize was really. So nothing happened to me, so my life continues as before. So I know. So Inés is a Savio and I know nothing. I mean, it's just the same. I just show you finally a picture of his granddaughter, which was part of a scientific point I was making, that we actually inherit with our genes what Shakespeare called the lineaments of the face, the shape of the face, because these people are separated by only a quarter of the genes in common. They're separated by 2 generations. Inés's daughter one generation, Inés's daughter and Inés's granddaughter. But how similar they are at the same age. No, I had something else to finish. This is really the end now. Sorry, I went on. I guess I go talk. You should have put me last, because I'm going to ruin the whole thing. Anyway, I just want to say it's a great honor for me to stand here in front of you in public and say how much of a pleasure it has been these 41 years working with Inés, how he's brought color and life to me, and how he has improved the quality of our science by his insight, and also might acknowledge that much of that background comes from the inside of Antonio, and it's a great privilege for me to see Antonio García-Bellido here in the audience as well, as we're all part of his F1, Inés and I. Thank you.